The first Russian armored columns cross into Estonia at 3 a.m., 40 minutes before anyone in Brussels is awake enough to answer a phone, while 3,000 miles east Chinese amphibious forces are already loading onto ships aimed at Taiwan on the same night, the same hour. No coincidence anyone in NATO planning ever seriously modeled. It is not one war. It is two wars sharing a start time, designed so that Washington cannot send everything it has to either one without abandoning the other. Estonian border units, outnumbered and outgunned within the first 20 minutes, fall back toward Tallinn rather than hold a line they were never resourced to hold. Latvia and Lithuania are next, Russian forces pushing along the coast and through the Suwalki Gap before Poland can fully mobilize the reinforcements NATO planning always assumed would have weeks, not hours, to arrive. Article 5 is invoked before sunrise in Brussels, which has never in NATO's history been a formality, and this time it is not one either. But invoking it and having the forces in place to make it mean something in the first 72 hours are two different problems, and Europe is about to find out which one it actually solved with a decade of increased defense spending. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is already committed off Taiwan when the order comes to also surge carrier groups into the North Atlantic. There are not enough carriers for both fights at once. Washington has to choose which theater gets priority, and for the first time since the Cold War, European leaders are not certain the choice will be them. By day 3, the Baltic states are effectively cut off by land, Kaliningrad's missile batteries closing the Suwalki Gap to any reinforcement column that isn't willing to fight through it first. Polish and German brigades finally arrive, but arrive into a defensive war for territory Russia already holds rather than the forward defense NATO planning documents assumed for a decade. In the Pacific, Chinese landing forces establish beachheads on Taiwan's western coast within 48 hours, faster than any U.S. wargame ever projected, because the simultaneous crisis in Europe means the carrier strike group that was supposed to arrive first is still 3 days out, committed instead to the North Atlantic. Britain and France activate their own nuclear deterrence to full alert without formally saying so, a posture everyone in Moscow and Beijing reads instantly regardless of the silence. It does not stop either invasion. It does change what every subsequent decision in every capital involved has to account for. By week 2, European industry that spent 30 years optimized for efficiency over resilience discovers it cannot produce artillery shells at the rate the front line in the Baltics is consuming them. American production surges to cover the gap, but American production is also trying to cover the Pacific at the same time, and there is only one industrial base doing both jobs at once. Ukraine, already exhausted from its own war, finds itself absorbing Russian units redirected north from a front line Moscow has decided it can afford to thin now that NATO's attention is split 3 ways across 2 oceans. By week 3, the war has stopped moving in the Baltics. Russian forces hold Latvia and most of Estonia, NATO holds a line anchored on Tallinn's outskirts and the Polish border, and neither side has the reserves left to break the other without pulling units from somewhere else that also cannot afford to lose them. Taiwan is different. The island has no equivalent of a Suwalki Gap to slow anyone down, and by week 3 Chinese forces control the western third of the island, pushing east through terrain that favors defenders more than the beaches ever did, turning what was a fast landing into a slow, block-by-block fight for Taichung. Japan, watching a Chinese invasion fleet operate this close to its own waters, moves from logistical support to direct involvement, its navy escorting American resupply convoys it once would have only shadowed from a distance. South Korea does not join outright, but quietly stops pretending its own forces aren't now positioned to respond if the peninsula becomes theater for. In Europe, French and British special forces begin operating inside Kaliningrad itself, a raid strategy nobody in Moscow anticipated because it was never supposed to be a target anyone was willing to touch. It does not retake the exclave. It does prove the war can reach places Russia assumed were sealed off by geography and nuclear signaling alone. By day 30, both wars have become wars of production, not maneuver. Whoever can still build ships, shells, an aircraft faster than the other side destroys them is winning, and for the first time since February, that calculation is starting to favor the side that controls more of the world's industrial capacity, even while controlling less of the actual battlefield. By day 45, Russia offers a ceasefire in the Baltics on terms that freeze the front line roughly where it sits, keeping most of what it took in the opening 72 hours. It is not a demand born of confidence. Domestic production cannot replace losses at the current rate, and the war in Ukraine's north is bleeding units Moscow needs on both fronts at once. China does not follow. Taiwan is too far along to abandon and too symbolically total a prize to trade away for a ceasefire it does not need in a theater where it is still advancing, even slowly, even at a cost nobody in Beijing planned for in February. Washington faces the choice it spent 2 months avoiding, accept a frozen, unfavorable peace in Europe to concentrate everything left on the Pacific, or keep fighting 2 wars at reduced capacity and risk losing ground in both. There is no version of this decision that looks like the clean victory anyone modeled beforehand. By day 60, the Baltic ceasefire holds, uneasy and unresolved, monitored by a peacekeeping force nobody fully trusts. Taiwan does not fall, but does not push the invasion back into the sea either. The island split along a front line that increasingly resembles Korea's more than anyone in Taipei wanted to admit was possible. Nobody signs a treaty that ends this the way treaties used to end wars. Kaliningrad stays a live front. The Pacific stays a live front. Both sides finished the year with militaries smaller than when it started and no clear sense of who actually won, only who has more left to lose if this starts again. What do you think? Does a war fought on 2 fronts like this end in exhaustion, or does one side eventually have to gamble on something bigger to break the stalemate? Drop your answer below. Subscribe for more what-if scenarios.